Joe Bavier is an American journalist now based in Germany who was for 3 years or so the Congo correspondent for Reuters based in Kinshasa. He's now working on an oral history of the Congo Wars and joined with this collaboration last summer to be the print reporter working with Marcus to tell the story, and then worked with Ida and Annika to decide where they were going to go and how to go about the project. He's written on this for The Economist and for Foreign Policy so far, and we're in the process of looking for other placements for the work that he's done. Those pieces in The Economist and Foreign Policy online are basically the only substantive reporting that has come out of any length in a major media outlet, and it speaks to the challenges of getting attention to this sort of work. You've seen the effect and what's happening on the ground, and as Ida said, the happening within half a kilometer of major United Nations forces, the biggest peacekeeping force in the world, and yet unable to stop it. And it's been Joe's task to try to untangle and to explain a very complicated multi-country situation in which the United States has played a role in the past and has responsibilities ongoing. So let me turn it to Joe to talk about the work that he's done.
Tonight I'll speak about the actual process of journalism on this project. Marcus Bleasdale and myself, we began in September and traveled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Eastern Central African Republic, and to Northern Uganda. We took 3 trips and finished up in December. Our goal was to shed some light on a story that's received scant attention over the last quarter of a century. This is not a new phenomenon. And it's become even more an invisible war since 2005. In the early 2000s, Jan Egeland, then UN Chief of Humanitarian Operations, called it one of the forgotten crises. It's even more so now. It's more difficult to reach. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for organizations like the Pulitzer Center to back this kind of reporting. I was a correspondent for Reuters, as John said, for 3 years, and covered what happened with the LRA, first of all in Eastern Central African Republic, and then following the Garamba bombings when they began a rampage that continues today. I saw how difficult it was to convince editors to put aside the resources to allow this kind of reporting. And what we were able to do was not something that I could have done with Reuters. I never would have had the budget to take even one of the chartered flights that we took. I never would have been given the time to spend 2 weeks in the bush riding from village to village on motorcycles, as Marcus and I did. And so we do have a great a debt of gratitude to those that made this possible, and I'm glad that we were able to do something to put this story out. Today, the LRA operates on the margins of countries that are already weak, have difficulty controlling rebellions on their borders, and they operate in areas that are largely forgotten by their own governments. And these are already some of the most marginal countries in the world. The costs involved in reaching these areas where there are largely not roads. We were in villages where chiefs told us that there weren't cars passing through on existing roads. Cars hadn't passed in over 20 years. We chartered flights at great expense, and we shipped in fuel. We hired local guides who know these villages and were able to point us towards the worst of the atrocities. We had the information from Human Rights Watch, which is invaluable in finding those that were able to speak to us about what had happened. To give you an idea of what these areas look like, you saw some of the pictures that Marcus went through briefly. These are heavily forested areas, jungle with areas of savanna. Most of these areas that we traveled through have been abandoned. Those that have survived the LRA tend to flock to areas of what they perceive is a small amount of safety. If there's a Congolese army base, a village will go there. If the Ugandans are somewhere, they'll go there. But we went through village after village that was completely abandoned. One of the great difficulties in covering the LRA is the fact that they're largely invisible. You can't find them. They don't actively recruit. There's been one interview with Joseph Kony in a quarter of a century of rebellion. If you run into the LRA, you can't exactly stop an interview. And so it presented a problem that I hadn't had to deal with in my coverage in Congo. Covering conflict in eastern Congo, you're able to drive up to front lines, you're able to witness the war as it unfolds, you're able to speak with commanders on both sides. This was impossible in this case, so we took a different tack. And what we did was we headed towards the population centers where we could find as many victims as possible. We carried out over 100 interviews with people who had been abducted, women who had been raped, those that had spent time with the LRA. Of those 100, we did perhaps 24 quite long interviews. These are hour-and-a-half, 2-hour-long interviews. And the goal was to recreate what it was like to be with the LRA, to try to give an idea of the experience of being in your village, being in your bed in the middle of the night, having the LRA knock on your door. You come outside. There's a line of people from your neighbors who have been tied together already. What it's like to be brought to an LRA camp, to be trained as a child soldier. What it's like, the sessions of brainwashing, of military training. And over the course of 2 trips to Democratic Republic of Congo and Central African Republic, we were largely able to do that. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we found. In these areas, we found a population that was completely unprotected. In Congo, with the world's largest UN peacekeeping mission, 18,000 peacekeepers on the ground, there are less than 1,000 in areas where the LRA is operating. These people live off their wits. We were in a village where a local chief sent hunters out into the bush to get an idea of where the rebels were, to know when they would attack, so he could at least inform the Congolese army so that they might be prepared when the rebels did arrive. Unfortunately, those national armies in Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo are more likely to loot, to rape their own people than to stand up and fight for them. We saw the Ugandan army, the UPDF, which is the linchpin of the American strategy against Joseph Kony and the LRA, the force that will likely, under the new strategy, continue to be so. We found an army that was ineffective. We found an army that was a force that was inadequate, and a force that had a willingness to fight that was at the very least questionable. Those we spoke to in these areas where they have no possibility of calling out for help, there are no phones, there is no real network to get a message out. Human Rights Watch, who stays on this every day, often they find out about attacks weeks, sometimes months later. They had one message for us, and they are aware of the law that was passed. They're aware that there's a strategy, and they had one message, and that was help us, come and help us. And that's what we're trying to do through this work. And I'd like to thank all of those that made that possible, and for you for having come out to listen to this. Thank you very much.